We begin our report in Florida, where Idalia has caused heavy damage after making landfall Wednesday as a Category 3 hurricane with maximum sustained winds of 125 miles an hour. The city of Perry, located about 50 miles southeast of Tallahassee, appeared to be hit hardest by the strong winds, heavy rain, and flooding. Electrical outages have been widespread in Florida's Big Bend region, where the state's panhandle transitions to the peninsula. In Tallahassee, a 100-year-old oak tree split in half on the grounds of the governor's mansion. Casey DeSantis, the wife of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, said on social media that she and her 3 children had been at home at the time, but thankfully no one was injured. At the moment, there have been no fatalities reported statewide as a result of the storm. Idalia has weakened as it moves over the southeastern portion of Georgia. It's now a tropical storm. We'll have the latest on its path in just a moment. Our correspondents, Omar Villafranca and Manuel Bojorquez, are covering the developments for us. David Parkinson is also here. Omar, though, will start us off from Crystal River, Florida, which is under several feet of water.
Hurricane Idalia roared ashore at 7:45 this morning.
Guys, coming here!
Packing powerful 125-mile-per-hour winds. The storm surge flooded hundreds of miles of Florida's Gulf Coast. The eye came ashore near Keaton Beach, which was nearly washed away by an 8-foot wall of water. Taylor County, along the state's Big Bend, bore the brunt of the storm. The town of Perry took a direct hit. Trees were ripped down, homes and businesses damaged or destroyed, including this gas station canopy, blown completely over. This woman and her daughter were nearly crushed when this tree fell into their home. Cameras caught waves in nearby Horseshoe Beach crashing into houses. Water levels there peaked at over 9 feet. Emergency operations are ongoing. More than 70 residents in Hudson rescued from floodwaters. In Citrus County, Yumi Zamora is one of several people headed to higher ground after being rescued. The hospital worker went to bed after her shift and woke up with floodwaters and emergency crews at her front door.
My car was getting on the water, so I just wake up and I start freaking out. So,
were you able to save anything?
Nope.
These rapids are actually in the middle of a parking lot, and this has residents concerned because they say this water is spilling over from the river and draining into the canals where many homes are located, and that's starting to flood the houses.
Parts of southern Georgia have already received more than 9 inches of rain, and flash flooding is a major concern. Manuel Bojorquez is in Savannah.
You can see the water churning inside the Savannah River, but the concern here isn't just river flooding or coastal flooding. It's the flash flooding that could happen with all of this rainfall, and high tide doesn't happen until later tonight. Idalia has also spun up multiple tornadoes. This car flipped and hit another vehicle on a highway outside of Charleston after a twister touched down. It is unclear if there were any injuries. A tornado warning is still in effect for several South Carolina counties.
Back here in Crystal River, Florida, the storm surge made roads almost impassable. Boats were tied to houses to keep them from floating away. Philip and Brenda Henley left their home this morning, and the water was already creeping into the house.
I'm an 8th generation Floridian. I've been here 62 years. This is as bad as I've seen it.
And Omar Villafranca joins us now. Omar, we've seen all that flooding. Is it as bad as it looks?
Well, it was a few hours ago. The water is receding pretty quickly, but where I was standing here probably about 12 hours ago, you wouldn't want to be standing here. You'd probably just see me up to here in my neck. This water was coming up pretty high when the surge was coming in and bands were rolling through. It was quite impressive because, well, this area is dry right here, and it's supposed to be right behind me is one of these canals here, right here on the Crystal River, and that is still over its banks here, but it has receded a lot here in the last few hours.
And Omar, what's the order of operations now if things are clear in terms of cleaning up and responding to everything that happened?
Well, it's weather clear right now, but just a few minutes ago, we still saw rescue vehicles speeding by. They're still taking people who tried to ride it out at home, or maybe the water came into their area and they can't that can't deal with it. They are moving people. Last check, the county here in Citrus County told me they've rescued 73 people and taken them from their homes to higher ground. So they're still doing that as we speak. And then they're going to start reassessing. Once this water recedes and people can get into their homes, some neighborhoods they can't even get into, they'll be able to assess the damage. We've seen some pictures where some residents snapped a picture maybe on a phone or like a ring or something before they lost power, and water was up to windows. They expect it to be higher in some areas, so the cleanup will be extensive. Some residents were telling me they're expecting it's going to take months to clean all this up.
And Omar, what about finally the 250,000 people are without power? What's the latest on that, and how long that might last?
Well, there was 25,000 power crews that were on standby across the state. And if you've ever seen these folks work, it's a miracle, the work they do in horrible conditions. Any power pole that was knocked down, they come stacked, locked and loaded and ready, and they put those things up lightning quick. But they've got to clear debris at the same time. That number at its peak was over 250,000. We're at about 213,000 now. That may not seem like much, but for those 25,000 people who do have their power now, I'm pretty sure that they're grateful. This could take weeks depending on what some of the areas look like. Because like I said, it's not just getting to a place and putting a pole up. They sometimes have to clear the road before they can do any work.
Omar Villafranca in Crystal River, Florida. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Now let's go to CBS national correspondent Manuel Bojorquez, who's in Savannah, Georgia. Manny, how are things there at the moment?
Well, John, we're getting a bit of a break right now from the squalls we had come through this afternoon. But one thing we've noticed is that as the winds die down, the water level of the Savannah River behind me seems to be creeping up, so that's going to be a concern. In these low-lying areas of Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, what you have going into tonight is the high tide is expected to happen later, but you also have rain from the storm still potentially coming downstream from areas where it is still pouring. So that confluence of water, that's a concern. It could still leave many communities waterlogged, so that's something we're watching as we head into the evening hours.
All right, Manuel Bojorquez in Savannah, Georgia. Thank you. For more, CBS News senior weather and climate producer David Parkinson is here in the studio with us. David, tell us the story of the storm so far.
The story of the storm is really one of micro-targeting in terms of where the winds were, where the worst conditions were. But the rain and the storm surge, that was widespread. Here is a current look at the rain, and where Manny is the southern edge. That's the center of the storm. Believe it or not, where we take a look at the center of the storm over Savannah, everything else to the north is all front-loaded. To the back, there's a whole lot of nothing except for one real outer band here that is set up south of Interstate 4, and that's actually where some of the most rain anywhere in all of Florida is. So it's a fascinating sort of setup here as we take a look at the way that the storm is playing out. But we can actually reset this, guys, just as a quick note, because I can't access the other maps. But this is going to be moving off to the north and east, and it becomes a North Carolina situation for the day tomorrow.
Now, it's a tropical storm now. Did that happen faster than we would have expected, about the normal pace of it? What does it tell us about this storm?
Yeah, so basically, if you take a look at where the storm tracked, right, it made its landfall here in the Big Bend, and then it made its way over Georgia, and then eventually into now South Carolina. When that happens, John, the key thing is when you go over land, the friction of the land destroys the storm. So it was strengthening all the way up to landfall here, and then right before it, it went through what's called an eye wall replacement cycle. Essentially what happens is that's the storm getting stronger by widening its eye. The problem when you have an eye wall replacement cycle, and I will actually be able to show it to you here, which is really interesting. The problem when you actually go through an eye wall replacement cycle is you can actually see it. You can see, here's the eye, and then you can see the eye break apart. So that's where we went from a Category 4. So at 5 a.m., we were a Category 4, and then it made landfall as a Category 3. So it actually weakened a little bit because it was spreading out. The actual width of the serious winds here in this storm was 10 nautical miles. That was it. So if you wanted hurricane force winds out of the storm, 10 miles from the center in either direction, that was it. So a very, very small storm. That was what was unique about this. But you had all the water piling in and storm surge and all this flooding concern, and that's what became the story of the storm.
And David, a few days ago or last week, you mentioned that the elevated temperatures in the ocean were going to were going to contribute to the storms in this season. Did we see that with this storm? And does that tell us something about the storms to come?
Yeah, so this didn't actually release a whole lot of heat. So basically everywhere here is water that's about 88 degrees. You can see it's this dark purple hue. It went over some of the warmest water on Earth, and you can see it became just a turbocharged storm. It had perfect structure until it went that eye wall replacement cycle. So what's really important to note here is the storm was a Category 1, and literally 24 hours later, it was a Category 4. That is a kind of rapid intensification that should not be achievable and would not be achievable without this kind of oceanic heat. And unfortunately, there's a whole lot of it that you can see in the Atlantic, in the Caribbean. So if the conditions are right, there's no wind shear, there's no other atmospheric conditions, you will see this and you will get more and more storms that have the kind of intensity that this storm has had. The good news, though, this area here is much, much, much less conducive for development, and it is actually going to, we were talking yesterday, could it recurve? The new update from the Hurricane Center says, no, it's going out to sea. So we are done with this storm by midday tomorrow.
A final chapter is coming. David Parkinson, thank you so much.